Well, Steve, this should be a great discussion we're going to have this afternoon. So, could you talk a little bit about yourself, how you got into planning? What brought you to this profession?
I'm one of those rare cases. I'm a little bit of a planning nerd. Even as a small child, I had an interest. As we'd be driving in a car, I'd look out the window and say, Mom, why is that building like that? Or why does the city look like this? I grew up in Glendale at a time when most people would have thought of it as a sleepy suburban community of Los Angeles. But it was actually in some ways a community in decline. The demographics of the city were changing. The neighborhoods at the center of the city were showing a lot of age and a lot of economic dislocation. And so I had this interest, but I didn't know what it was called. My family would say, I think it's architecture. You should check into architecture. And then one day we got a notice in the mail, and it was for the proposed redevelopment project area for Central Glendale. And the suggestion was that our neighborhood...
Did you know what a redevelopment project was?
I didn't, but I wanted to find out.
Okay.
And so we trooped the family down to the hearing room at the Civic Center to watch the hearing. And I remember watching it and thinking, this is really fascinating work, but they're doing all the wrong things. They're not respectful to the public. A gentleman gets up and he says, I'm a Cuban immigrant and I own my house. Are you going to take my land from me? And the city officials are all, no, we're not going to take land from you. We're going to negotiate with you. And he says, well, what if I don't want to negotiate? And they say, well, then we will take your land, but we'll pay you for it. And I'm thinking, this is a terrible thing. This was terrible the way these things were being done, particularly in the 1960s. I didn't know that there was a reporter sitting in the audience, and as I talked with my mom about what I was seeing, the reporter was busy recording notes. And the next day in the paper, it talks about the 11-year-old kid at the hearing who had all these questions about planning and redevelopment. But my mom did something very clever. She said, go talk to the people at the end of the meeting, find out what it is they do, because maybe that's what you want to do. And so I walked up and introduced myself, and they greeted me, gave me a tour of their offices, and sort of mentored me until I was through high school. We exchanged letters. They told me what planning schools they would recommend. So I kind of jumped in from 11 on. I kind of knew that's what I wanted to be, an urban and regional planner.
So how did that influence where you went after that?
Where I went meaning for college, or where I went?
College, and then on to what you did.
This is very funny. The folks at the city said, well, there were 3 schools at the time in Southern California that they would recommend, UCLA, USC, and Cal Poly Pomona. So before I went to college, this would be, I think, when I was in JC, I visited all 3. And I remember that when I showed up at UCLA, they didn't have any record that they'd set an appointment with me. They said, oh, just walk around the campus, here's some literature. I thought, I don't like the way that looks. It was 45,000 students on campus. I didn't like the feel of that. So then I went down to USC. This was in the days before USC got all buffed up. And there they were expecting me for my appointment, but they had nothing to give me, nothing to show me, nobody to talk to. And then finally I thought, oh my God, I've got to drive out through the smog belt to Cal Poly Pomona. I drive out to Cal Poly, and as my car descends through the smog onto campus, I'm driving up the main street, University Drive, and I have to stop the car at the official duck crossing where the ducks were making their way from the artesian pond to the engineering lawn. And I thought, this looks like a place I'd like to go. And I went up to the College of Environmental Design, met with a professor there. The professor gave me a tour, and I'm thinking, a CSU campus gave me this superior experience that I couldn't get at 2 name universities, and that sent me to Cal Poly Pomona.
Very good, very
now,
good.
Maybe I should turn the tables on you for a minute and ask, what's a nice girl like you doing in a field like this?
So, yeah, that is a good question. Earlier I had said that I didn't even know what planning was, and I was talking to my mother, and she said, oh, I know the planning director because your grandfather got a use permit to build this grocery store And today they don't give those types of use permit variances to build this grocery store, but we'll go down and talk to him. And he spent time with me telling me how great this career was, how much he enjoyed what he was doing, and I should think about it. So I said, I'm going to go to law school. So I was at Santa Clara University working with 2 law professors to earn money to go to Santa Clara. And after working with them and saw what the law students did, and one of them was a professor in contracts, I said, I'm not going to spend 3 years doing this, or even a semester learning about contracts. So I talked to an attorney who was the father of one of the women I went to school with, and he said, you really should go into government law, city government law. And he said, maybe planning would be a good profession for you. And I said, oh, use variances. Why do I want to go into planning? And there was one class in the engineering department at Santa Clara that was an urban planning class. And I enrolled in it. And I should have known then this profession was mainly for men, because there was only 2 women in the class. I was one of them, and we never could be absent. Because everyone, the professor knew when the women were absent.
Oh.
So it was an interesting. But then I applied to the 2 schools in our area, which were UC Berkeley and San Jose State, had just gotten their master's in urban planning. And then my mother found that HUD was doing fellowships for planning school. So I applied for it. And I couldn't get into Berkeley because they were more looking for design people, and that wasn't what I was looking for, the policy law element of the profession. And I got into San Jose State, which was interesting because it was just the beginning of their master's program. So a lot of professionals were teaching the classes.
Yeah.
So it really broadened your scope of what planning was about, what you needed to know. It was a great adventure for me. And I won the fellowship, so that helped me in terms of being able to do that.
That's wonderful, but I was touched by something you said, which was, you said that your mentor, when you were still on the law side, before you made the jump, recommended that a planning program might be right. And what's significant about that is, I know when I was young, you were hard-pressed to find people who even knew what planning was or knew what planners did. So you were blessed to have somebody
Yes.
who actually knew.
And that's because he worked with a lot of cities and understood the role of that profession, which really helped me understand, oh, I don't want to really be an attorney, but I'm going to learn about law a lot. And that's what really enticed me to that. And so with the fellowship, it gave me money for the program, but also gave me an internship with the city of Mountain View.
Oh, wow.
So it was a really unique experience to be able to do that work as an intern and really be in the profession early on while still going to graduate school. So I was really fortunate to be able to do that.
This speaks a little bit to the importance of the internships you get to do. I know as a budding planner, I signed up for an internship with the City of Glendale. There were 5 of us, and I signed on right before Prop 13. And Prop 13 passed, and the next day they fired all the interns on the staff. But I went into the boss's office, and everybody else just packed up their stuff and left, and I said, is there any way I could stay and keep working as a volunteer?
Right.
And they said, yeah, we need the help. What would you want in exchange for doing that? And I said, I'd like you to type my senior project for me. And I'd like to be able to do real work, meaning not just fetching coffee or doing the things that often interns would be asked to do. And they were wonderful, and it gave me a so much better experience that I think really helped me when I was applying for jobs because I'd had a good, solid internship.
Right, because you knew enough to know walking into that office what to expect.
Exactly.
And without that, you would not know what to expect. It's like when you're interviewing first year planners that go, oh yeah, I know what it's about, and then you ask them specific questions and they look at you and go, well, not really. So I said, be more honest, because that's really going to help you when you're applying for a job. So I think that that's kind of, and I think as I got into the profession, when I was hiring interns, I specifically learned how important it was to give them something they feel they could fulfill and help them in furthering their career. So
Exactly.
that was really good.
You made a comment earlier about that when you were in classes in which you were one of only 2 women in the class, if you were absent for any reason, that was immediately noticed. And that, I think, plays to a bigger theme that we actually have somewhere else here on the list of questions, but it's such a natural introduction, I want to pursue it, which is that especially during the time that you were coming up in planning, there were real issues with gender roles and the behavior of men toward women in offices. And I know from things you've told me, you had a few experiences of your own. Would you care to share a little bit about those experiences and also what things you think have changed?
So, as I was talking to you, Steve, about it, when I was reading these questions and thinking about the understanding of women in the profession, the first thing that popped to my mind was my first attendance at an APA meeting in San Francisco. And there were 2 planners there that were both vying to be president of Cal Chapter APA. One was Bert Muley, who was a professor at San Jose State. The other one, I can't remember his name, but you would know it. He's from LA, very opinionated, and he ran to be chapter president, and he ran on the basis that we should split the chapter in half. There should be a northern chapter and a southern chapter. And I
think I know who you're talking about now.
We were in the basement of one of the San Francisco high-rises, kind of like a bar setting. There were no women there, and my friend and I, both in graduate school at San Jose State, walked into the meeting. They were all smoking cigars and drinking bourbon. And talk about feeling out of place.
Yeah.
And they never really greeted us, but they did say hello. But it was, and then they went off on their tangent about this. And for people that didn't even understand the organization, I don't know why I just didn't get up and walk out and try something else. But I didn't. Stuck with it. And I think that when I started working and became a director in a city, the hardest thing for me was going to department head meetings, being the only woman there. Because if you tried to suggest something that would assist women in your department, the instant sighs of like, not now, not really, would come through. I had a woman planner, just a very good staff person, and she gave birth to her first child. And she had some time off. She really was excited about that. And as the time started to end, she came to me and she said, I really don't feel comfortable coming back to work. I need some extra time to be with my child. Can I work part-time? And I said, I don't know why you can't work part-time. Let me talk to the city manager, and if we can make it work, I think that's a fair position to do. And I said, what about if you came in like in the morning, or if you prefer the afternoon, and then you would only be here part-time, and I expect that amount of work out of you. So I went to the city manager. He said, Janet, if you can handle it, and if you can get your work done, go to it. So when I was at the department head meeting, after that decision was made, one of the department heads go, "You really screwed it for the rest of us. Because now women in my department are going to ask for the same thing, and I'm not comfortable with that decision." I said, "Well, Colleen is doing an amazing job. She's doing twice as much work as if she was here, I mean, almost equivalent to being full-time, because she wants to be home with her child." And I feel that's a fair accommodation for a woman. And if you oppose it, then you have to deal with it in your own department, but I think it works well. And just recently, I was at Colleen's daughter's wedding. So it's a real example of that. And women were dying for that kind of just recognition that we need to be able, there's some things that are so important to us, we should be able to accommodate them, and it doesn't mean we can't produce the work that we needed.
There was a case in Southern California, the city of Monrovia, where the then, this is 20 plus years ago, where the then director and the planning manager both were having children and went through a period where they did job sharing so that they could take the time off like that. I think that's evidence that things have changed, but even then I remember that was quite a lift and quite a negotiation.
Right. And it's, you know, you do encounter things that, as a woman, that I had two older brothers, so I kind of learned how to put up with a male family kind of thing. And I think that helped me being able to work with men where, you know, so if someone came to the counter and said, I need someone to talk to, and I can remember someone said, and I really don't want to talk to a woman, I'd go, okay, that's fine. I'll let you talk to one of my staff, and if you need to go above his head, I'm here.
Yeah.
So it gave them the freedom, and after that, that gentleman, when he came to the counter, would talk to me. It was just his allowance to do that.
We've talked about, as we prepared for these interviews, that seems to be common in many cities and many communities, that people would show up at the counter and simply demand to be seen by a man, assuming that men had all the power in the office, and then different ways that agencies deal with that. I think I told you we had one time that I said, well, I'm appointing you, pointing to a senior planner, a female senior planner, I'm appointing you the director for today. I'm going to leave for a meeting, and when they say I want to speak to the director, you can say, I'm the director right now. And sometimes you just have to let them know that's how it's going to be.
Well, and you never know when it's going to arise. I mean, it's like, you know, and you don't know how it's going to arise.
Right.
And you've got to be prepared as a director to be able to respond to those additional occasions becoming. I had a council member that basically at one meeting told me that I should be home taking care of my children. And I politely told them that they had a very good father taking care of them. And, you know, it's like something you're not expecting and you have to be able to respond to. But I, of course, immediately told the city manager if he does that again, we'll have to be talking about legal issues that will come up. And he didn't bother me like that again. But he used to really, during a council meeting, really question my authority, question my knowledge, you know, just after one thing or another, like, you don't know the law. And I'd go, yeah, I worked on that bill, and this is what the law says, and you should be aware of it. But my husband was really upset the way he was treating me, so he sent me some flowers with a ceramic turkey. And the message was, don't let the turkey get you down. So I kept the turkey at every council meeting just by my nameplate. And when he'd go to harass me, I'd just tap the turkey on the head. And I thought about that later, and I thought that was really a good way for me. One of our councilwomen saw me kept doing this when the council member was kind of nasty sometimes, and she came up to me at break and said, "What are you doing? I see your hand." What? I said, "Well, this is the turkey. It's a turkey for Harry."
Yeah.
And she goes, "I love it. I love it." Because he was always telling her that she could bring the food for any time of occasion the council was having. And she said, "I don't make the food and I don't do the dishes either." So just remember that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, sometimes you have to have a comedy way to be able to step down. And I used to lend my turkey out to women that were having similar kinds of problems. You raised a question about, do you think it's improved? And recently I was talking to a director, and she says it's still hard. It's still hard to be with, and she mentioned the same thing. It's really hard with department heads because certain assumptions are made, and they expect more out of you. And so you have to be able to find yourself ways to be able to do that. And I said, well, maybe we should get you a ceramic turkey. So that kind of way that you can then help in trying to address.
Or
things
maybe
like
more
that.
cities with a majority female department heads. That subtle shift in the balance of power.
Yeah, and I think so. And like the city of Sacramento has all women council. So that whole shift in
different
terms
culture.
of what happens. And it would be interesting to see if males now are feeling some of that concern, or like, why, is this happening? Or we've removed that because what women have gone through, they should be able to deal with
Right.
that situation better.
Right.
So-
Well, and I do think this is also a question of how we talk about how we've evolved as planners, but we tend to be a more progressive community to start
Right.
with, but we work with other professions that may not share all of those values. There are other professions that work in the public sphere that I think have made great progress in this area, and other professions that have not.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So anyway, that's my story. And you don't have a turkey.
I don't.
Did you ever experience any of that with some of your
No.
staff? Well, as a city manager, did you ever see your department heads kind of like wander and not,
No, I don't.
or had you established very clearly on,
Well, I was fortunate. By the time I became a city manager, I'd come up in the organization.
that's true.
So I'd been sort of growing with the organization. They all knew me. I think relationships were already established. There was a benefit
yeah,
in that.
okay, that's true.
And because I was succeeding a city manager who perhaps was not entirely popular within the organization, that provided me an opportunity. And that's not a bad way to come in,
Right.
even though it's very difficult to come into environments that are where there's been a hostility or challenges. It, for me, turned out to be a good choice. I had the council backing me.
Right, that's true.
I had the department heads backing me. And so I don't think I had those particular problems. My biggest challenge earlier in my career was developer lawsuits. When I went to work in Laverne, which is a very nice suburban community, the east side of Los Angeles County, and in the 1970s, there was still a large part of that city that was not developed. It was citrus groves and beautiful territory, but much of it, before my arrival, had already been committed through sales and purchases to developers who wanted to do planned communities. And I came into a city that was eager to change the dynamic, flip the script, if you will,
Okay.
on how the city was doing its planning. And so I was put in charge of the first major general plan update in many years. It went on to win an APA award, but it also got the city sued over both the general plan and the EIR. And I found myself in days of depositions with the representatives of the attorney, or the attorneys for the developers.
Developers.
And it was a developer that had done a great deal of work in that part of Southern California and probably had reason in their mind to believe that this would not be a difficult approval to get. And instead, they saw a project that they had proposed at somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 units and losses of 2,000 native oak trees. Saw the city say, we don't think it's an 800 unit project, we think it's about 130 units, and we think that 2/3 of the site is going to be preserved. And we adopted a new general plan that embodied those sorts of values. It was a difficult fight. It was probably, up to that point in my career, the toughest thing I'd had to do, to go in time and time again and tell the council, no, do not settle. And we knew that the developer ultimately had more resources than we had and could fight longer, but the economy turned. And when the economy turned, the developer had a reason to say, okay, let's settle this. And they settled for numbers and design that was much closer to what the city's original position would be. And we got a chance then to reset the relationship and show that we could help move that and get that done.
So
yeah, at a level that when we wrapped up, we had a giant breakfast for the development team to show them, no hard feelings. And I still, from time to time, I'm retired now, but up till a couple of years ago, if I was at a conference where they were represented, they'd make a point of stopping to say hi. So it all worked out in the end, but boy, it was a brutal period of time. I had to face down a previous director of the city who wanted to argue that decisions he had made had been legal, and I was there to argue they weren't. And I was pleased that I think I had the facts on my side, but
congratulations. Not everyone wins those.
No, that was a way to get some really quick and important experience, because I honestly thought on any day I might go in and that would be the day they said, well, thanks, it's been fun having you here, but
look for a new position somewhere.
I think I knew that I was okay when the toughest council member said in one of these last settlement conferences, I think the city manager might have even said, Steve's been worried that his job is on the line for all of this. And this council member said, the day that I'm not going to believe him is the day he comes in and tells me that everything the developer has been saying is right. In the meantime, I want him to keep doing what he thinks is the right thing. And I would hope that everybody as a planner gets to have that experience.
And I think that's real important. As a planner, when you're working on a particular project, you show that just in terms of your credibility, you have to do what's right. And sometimes that puts you in a position that you're on the edge.
Yeah.
But think what you would do if that wasn't
right.
For you, that's your credibility, and it's also what you believe in. So it's really important to be able to do that.
That's right. They asked a very interesting question with conference registration this year. Do you have a slogan? And I thought for a minute, and I typed in, I actually do have a slogan, and the slogan comes from a Greek expression. I'm part Greek. So when I learned this, I thought, oh, this is great. But the English translation is achieve the honorable. And I wish I could say that I learned this slogan because of my impressive reading of Greek literature. No, actually we were driving by, 40 years ago, driving by Hollywood High School, and apparently that's the school's slogan. And on the board outside the school, it said Hollywood High School, achieve the honorable. And I thought, what? If there's one sentence that I think is a marvelous statement of belief, that's it. Always try to be honorable, always try to achieve something significant. And I can't remember now the Greek expression that translates to achieve the honorable, but that has been sort of the guiding star for me. There are days that I've gone home and said, I failed. I didn't meet that. There have been days I've been upset at myself for my failings, and there are other days that I've lasted out tough battles and came back to say, this was good, this was the way. And more times than not, many more times than not, doing the right thing has worked out well.
That's right. And it's what you can then tell your staff that makes it important, because, it's like if a staff makes a mistake and they go, oh, I said, we're all entitled to some mistakes. As long as you are assured and are telling me that you did the best you could and it didn't work out.
Exactly.
That's the important thing.
Exactly.
What did Betty Crawley used to say to her staff people when she brought them in?
Don't ever lie to me.
And so those are the kinds of things that I think we can never lose and bring.
Betty Crowley, for those of you who don't know, was one of the earliest examples of a female California planner who was elevated to a position of influence. She was, in the 1970s, the assistant director of Alameda County Planning, as she was also the first historian for APA California, and set a legacy that we're still following today. But when she passed away, there were hundreds of people that turned out for her memorial service. And person after person went up to the front and said, on my first day, Betty sat me down in a chair and she said, the first rule, my first belief is, don't ever lie.
I know, it was like so powerful, and I thought every time after that, I talk to people, I go, key thing, be honest with me and don't lie. Because that's how we're going to be able to be strong and work together. So it's just...
so this kind of gets to the topic of leadership. And even though we focused mostly on our professional experience so far, we've also had the benefit of working together for a very long time in the coal mine that we call APA, and at all different levels of APA. And so I'm maybe interested in exploring with you a little bit your experiences as a leader, both in terms of your experiences in trying to run this organization, but also how the organization has changed.
So when I first got involved in APA or leadership of APA, I was the VP for what was then called State and Local Affairs, which didn't seem to be the right title, and I appreciate the fact that they've changed it. It was right at the time we were hiring Sandy George. David Boer said that was the most important thing that the organization had to do, was to bring on their own lobbyist. And so I'm in this position of dealing with legislation and basically working with Sandy to develop the process for how the organization would deal with legislation and lobbying and bills and how we're going to review them as an organization. Because in history, as you pointed out, in Monterey, when they started, it was all male, and they would work on developing white papers on particular issues that would take months to prepare, and that was what they would use to lobby for a bill.
And what you're referring to here is the very first planning organization in California
was in Monterey.
Was the California Planners Institute, and they met here. In Monterey,
which is
in
where we are today.
1934. There were about 35 people attending the meeting. They were all middle-aged white males. And that was the planning community.
And then they would pick a topic that they thought was important, and learn about, so they can, which was, today in legislation, with how many bills are being used, but over 300, you wouldn't have enough white paper to do all of that. Or time. So, that's when we developed the legislative committees, and I began work with Sandy. And I think one of the most important things that came out in those early years was getting us known with the legislature and their committees, that we knew what we were talking about. And Sandy was very good at delivering that message. And she really felt was important is to get the members to feel and how to review bills, what they needed to focus on, and then getting those people involved in different things. We were at the Subdivision Map Act Task Force. We had a member from APA on that, and then we had the Growth Management Task Force.
And the housing element, many housing element reform
I was
task
on
forces.
many housing element reform subcommittees of HUD actually. And so the idea was we got known out there and we got involved. In fact, I was even involved when they did SB 375 on how to, negotiate some of the standards that were in that bill. And we've seen other environmental bills that we've had different people from the organization. I know Pete Parkinson was involved. So the idea was, we started to become known that if you needed some expertise, we could do that, which really changed then our abilities to lobby and to take positions. You know, initially everyone thought we went along with the League or CSAC, and people were saying, we're not the League or CSAC, but we had to take time to get to the position where they would listen to us just as APA Cal chapter and not affiliated with someone else.
And to set the time frame here for people who might not know this history, Sandy was first brought in, professional lobbying, let's say, about 1980.
Right.
1984, Sandy was made the executive director and served 35 years almost as both the lobbyist for the chapter and the executive director. So that's the time frame in which you were making these critical decisions that have sort of changed the focus of the organization. By the time I came along, now you served as president in 1987 and 88. I served a few years later in 1992 and 93. But by the time I became president, I remember having some very interesting discussions with the folks at National APA, who in one discussion, I remember the attorney for APA saying to me, well, how many bills do you really need to have a lobbyist? How many bills a year do you lobby in the legislature? And at the time, the number that we frequently would say was about 150 bills each year in the legislature. And he said, no, I didn't mean how many bills are introduced in your legislature, how many do you lobby? I said, no, the number of bills we introduce in California is about 2,000 a year. And we have 150, they're on planning themes that we need to lobby. Because for years, California was one of only 6, I believe, chapters that had professional lobbying. And we were either the first or the second to have a professional lobbyist.
And the realities are it's just grown today. I mean, Lauren talks about 300, 350 bills that they're have to review, take positions on, work on the language in the bill, make recommendations. And so that was a big change for this organization. I can't even imagine today how we could survive without a lobbyist. And the system that we've developed now to be able to take positions on bills.
The difference, the change that you've described, this trajectory of how making that critical decision to hire a lobbyist really changed how our organization performed. Many years later, when I was up in Sacramento testifying on a matter before some committee of the legislature, I met with Sandy, and we were walking through the state capitol, and the number of people who come up and oozed enthusiasm for her, who came to ask tough questions because she was seen as this effective, smart, impartial, evidence-based source. She is, by definition, a lobbyist, and people have opinions in their mind, pre-formed judgments about who lobbyists are. And I think we saw early on that if you do this right and you hire somebody like a Sandy George, you're hiring somebody whose ethics are aligned with the work you do, who's trying to provide factual information so that the state legislature and its various committees know what planners do, what values they uphold, and what we need to be able to do our jobs effectively.
And the other thing that I think is important in terms of working on all these committees, which seemed endless at the time, was, you know, we had one instance where one of the task force that was created for the first time brought in people of color. And we, as an organization, didn't really have affiliation with these different groups. And we were able to make now that connection to work with them, for them to help us, for us to help them. That would not have existed if we didn't have in place this ability and the system in place to be members of those task force. So I think that's really been a major growth for the organization as well, in terms of working on trying to broaden our effectiveness with people of color, communities of color,
Yeah.
and understanding how we have to change in terms of some of our policy development
Yeah.
regarding those areas, especially in the areas of housing. So I think those are all critical to who we are and what we've become as an organization.
Absolutely. I want to mention something else, though, that started during your term and that I got to work on during my time, which was that how we communicate as planners.
Very important.
The organization had never really had a well-organized, it would have an officer appointed to handle the chapter's publicity and run its newsletter. But if you look historically at our publications, for example, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they weren't terribly professional. They were small scale. And we weren't doing external communications to try and attract audiences to understand who planners are and what we stand for. But you started during your time those things. You hired Vonnie Madigan to handle communications for the chapter, started producing a much more professional looking publication. Over the years, I know we added a public relations consultant in my time.
And we did op-eds
And we did op-eds on a regular basis.
in major
And
newspapers.
when Vonnie was with us as our communications consultant, every gubernatorial election, she secured interviews with the Democratic and the Republican candidates for governor, and we ran those interviews edited
That's right.
in Cal Planner. So that communications thing was something that in the early days of APA California, there wasn't much of that being done. And there wasn't really the capability, the organizational resources to do it. But your period of time, which is a period of real growth and development in the chapter, saw that begin to happen and continued during my time, although we hit the top of a curve right before I became president and went into a recessionary period.
That's right. And we really
Which
took a hit for us as an
we
organization.
did. I think the organization dropped from over 5,000 members to 3,800
Yeah,
at the
it
beginning
really
of my
dropped.
term. And so we did a little more of a back to basics focus on many of our programs, but with still this strong emphasis on the things that you pioneered: legislation, communications, and the one thing that, a couple of things that were unique to my time in office were the Planners Threatened Support Network. There was a period of time in which, in a recessionary economy, people were finding political excuses to get rid of planners and planning departments. And the board wanted to take action on that, so we created a handbook for planners who thought their jobs or their livelihoods were being threatened. What are the avenues you have available to you? What are the resources you have available? And the chapter stepped in several cases, simply with the idea that we won't be able to win a battle. We don't have the resources to do that, but we can go on and offer to educate a city council on what the appropriate role is for a planner in your city. And we did one of those things, and it got the city manager of that town so angry that they chased me down, found my city manager, and said, "You have to fire your planning director." And the city manager strolls into my office and he looks at me with this weary look and he says, "Have you been writing any letters recently?" And I knew immediately what this was about. And I said, "Yeah, but it was on APA letterhead, was signed in my role as president of the organization, had nothing to do with our city." And he said, "I get that." He said, "Apparently she went to the trouble of finding the little indicia line on the fax and came from the city hall because my assistant had..."
And that's the risk you always took.
That's the risk.
As president.
And he was so good. This was a great city manager that I was so proud to work for. He took me into his office and sat me down and he goes, "You be very quiet." And then he gets on the phone with this other city manager and proceeds to say, "No, I don't think he did anything wrong. I expect my department heads to stand for the professional values of their organization. If you don't like the letter, you can throw it away. You don't have to share it with your city council." This goes on for about 15 minutes, and the person gets angry enough that they hang up on my city manager. And the city manager looks at me and he says, "Did I do okay?" And I said, "You did. Thank you so much for bailing me out." And he goes, "Would you just promise you won't send any more letters this week?"
And working on legislation, I would have to sign the letters just like you did.
Yeah.
And you never knew when someone would get back to your boss.
Yes.
And, and I would always say to my city manager, well, you want us as directors to be active in our organization at the state level,
Yep.
because it just makes Woodland look stronger, or our Citrus Heights
That's
look
right.
stronger. And I was thinking that usually all the city managers goes, yes, Janet, that's fine, okay. But, there's always going to be one that's going to go, not happy.
Yeah, right,
So
right.
that's the risk you take. And
That is.
but you have to have that to be able to run for, Cal chapter president, or even at the national level if you chose to do that. So
Yeah. Well, we're here doing this interview because we're kind of senior members of the profession now, and we're both effectively retired from day-to-day
exactly.
work as a planner. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are about how the profession has changed, how APA has changed as an organization from what you remember at the start. Any observations, or maybe even suggestions for the up-and-coming generation?
So I would hope, and I'm seeing this with some of the legislation that we have to be actively involved in, that we take the time to make sure we're really reflecting our values as planners in the organization, and that especially around the areas of housing. Housing is very important to our community. How we grow our communities is important. How we're sensitive to the kinds of housing we're building and who it serves are all key. But do we make sure that the basic importance of creating neighborhoods and creating communities that our constituents who we work with are being called upon and understand why we're doing things? And that means better education of why we do things. I mean, as I was saying to Steve earlier, you have this constant thing of hearing, we're doing all this for the homeless. And I prefer to think we're doing this because we want our communities to be stronger. Is it fair that seniors who are living on Social Security, as their rents go up, are becoming a growing population in our homeless shelters?
Mm-hmm.
And can we do something about that? Can we make sure we're building more senior housing? And does our legislation that we're looking at talk about that?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it silent to that? And all we're talking about is numbers, because it's the type of housing that we have to be reflective of. I'm on a board for building homeless housing, and it was hard. We just got through working on a complex with a new shelter, 61 units of permanent supportive housing, and 60-unit bed facility for drug and alcohol addiction. And all of those buildings are built. But what we're finding is having enough money to have staffing at these facilities and counseling at these facilities to keep like the shelter open. Because that cost is not something that I hear a lot of money coming down for us.
Yeah.
And how do we, so we have to go beyond just looking at building what we're doing, but how do we work together to get funding to be able to manage the care we need in all of these units, and look at different issues that are coming up, like with the seniors. Since we don't control Social Security, but how do we get housing that will be able to answer their needs? Or can we be pushing in a community for maybe we give supplemental money to the seniors to keep them in the housing they're already in, and not build new housing?
I think the point of what you're saying is that everything that you're talking about is talking about real outcomes in planning.
That's right.
Outcomes that have a tangible impact on the people who receive them. One of the greatest worries I have about the direction we're going as a profession is as the body of planning laws becomes so much more complex and gets to a gnat's hair level of detail
Right.
in terms of what's expected, I worry that planners are being forced to accept proxies for real outcomes. The proxy is, did you get the environmental impact report done? The proxy is, did you get your housing element approved? Each of those things is important for procedural and for policy reasons, but does not substitute for the things that people can actually do to directly improve their communities. I worry that as time goes on, planners are going to be forced to sit with 5 attorneys around them because they can't move without, reevaluating all of the laws that are coming at them, and that they're going to be asked to settle for less and less meaningful ways of changing communities, which is why I think so many specialized forms of planning, bicycle planning, or
Right.
are actually having such a burst of love because you can
It's
get
something
real
you can
things
get done.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And the dilemma that I see that we're facing, in fact, I just saw an article on the internet a couple days ago that basically said, oh, we're looking at so many new housing bills this year. When you add it to all the bills over the last 3 to 5 years that have been adopted that planners are having to deal with, at some point, all they're doing is spending time rewriting their zoning ordinances. But wait a minute, this year there's going to be more that's going to impact that, so they have to rewrite it. Oh, and don't forget your housing element now has to be changed. And when you're all done with that, maybe you can figure out if any units have been built.
This is funny you should mention that. I'm working on I've just come out of representing an organization I belong to, Pasadena Heritage, a historic preservation organization. Historic preservation has been a passion for my whole career. And I've been participating in a specific plan process in Pasadena, where the Planning Commission has just completed work on a marvelous new specific plan that attempts to make a great street out of one of its major commercial corridors. In the plan is embedded a section that talks about all of the other plans the city has that will now have to be modified in order to fulfill the vision of the specific plan. And I worry about this thing of planning just to plan more, because you can't just go from a plan anymore to implementation. You have to go back and fix all the other plans that need to be fixed. And I think, I'm not sure that's what we intended to be doing as planners, but this is, at least in this case, this is an excellent plan that the city's worked very hard on, and we're very proud to support if we don't get tied up in doing so much planning bookkeeping, and focus instead on the outcomes.
I was just thinking, one of my staff, former staff in Citrus Heights, has been working on a project since I worked there, and I've been retired 15 years, and this is a project that was all fourplexes. There were just crime. The condition of the housing was really bad, and they tore down some because they were in bad shape, and they have been working for several years with Habitat for Humanity to get the funding available to rebuild this whole area and create a new neighborhood for people who will have houses to live in that they have built, and that is just broken. They've broken ground, and they just had as part of the Habitat for Humanity celebration, the celebration of this project, and to see that happening after it started when I was there to now being finished, just raises the question, if you get so caught up in ordinance revision and not in project development that really serves your community, which is better?
Yeah.
That's really the basic question
Right.
you have to ask.
Exactly.
And so it's exciting to see that happening. And I have to give a shout out to Allie Bermudez, who's been working on this project. she was initially hired to be my assistant as a director. And she really wanted to do planning. And I said, well, there's ways we can move you up the ladder. And I said, UC Davis has classes you can take, because she couldn't, given her, and we also had some money to help her get some college classes, but more importantly, she just illustrated her ability to learn about planning and be effective. And she has worked herself up to be a senior planner in the Citrus Heights organization. And for her to follow through and get that done, plus she is writing all the changes to the Citrus Heights zoning ordinance to comply with the law.
Yeah.
So, it's, people are working hard to do what they need to do.
Yeah.
But, it's a triumph when they're able to see that project come forward
Yeah.
and be built and serve the people that needed it. And she commented on LinkedIn that she was able to meet the people that were going into the housing.
Yeah.
And she said that just made her heart feel good, because they were able to do that. So
Very cool. Very
it's just
cool.
like, anyway.
Are we doing okay on time?
I think we have enough. We're about 56 minutes, so if you want to close it out.
So I was just going to suggest that one of the things we could quickly talk about, and we could do it in like one word expectations for future planners, about some of the things we would like them to think about. And one of them for me is humor. That in order to be effective, you've got to have a sense of humor for things that don't happen, but for things that happen, and way to be able to work with your staff and work with your fellow planners and how they do that. And also compassion for the community that you're in, and the knowledge that you want them to present to your fellow community members. And if you don't know what's going on, take a walk in your community.
Exactly. I think I would offer the word trust.
Very good.
You and I have both taught and mentored young people coming up in the profession. And one of the things that I hear asked a lot is, I've got my degree, I know the stuff inside out, why does nobody listen to me?
Yeah.
And my answer is, it's not that your knowledge isn't being disrespected, it's that separate from all of that education you got in college, all that is the groundwork. You then have to go out into the world and build trust with people. And the more you build that trust, the more willing they're going to be to listen to your suggestions. And once you've got that trust, you can accomplish amazing things. I've had city managers say to me, you won't be able to do in this community what you want because this community is not progressive enough. And my own feeling when I hear that is to say, no, I don't buy it. Because when you build the trust, and the city council trusts you, they will do those things that need to be done.
It's interesting, when my kids were young, they'd ask me what I do, and I say I'm a planner. And they go, oh, you plant stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought about it, and I go, yeah, that's what we do. We have to plant a seed. And it may not be happening any time in either one of our careers and wherever we've worked. But if you plant that seed, the next planner may say, oh, that's a good idea. Let's modify it a little bit.
Right.
And then it becomes into fruition.
Exactly. You and I had also talked about that you thought an important concept is economics. That
Right.
not enough planners get a proper understanding of land economics. You want to comment just for a moment on that?
Yeah, I think that, and I look back over my career, the toughest times have been when a developer walks in and says, well, I can't do what you want to do because economically it doesn't work out for me.
Yeah.
And I'm going like, okay, how do I respond?
Yeah.
And I really had to learn a lot, or bring in people that could help me understand the economics, because I could then respond to questions like that, or even community questions of why do you need to do this, or
Right.
why are we doing it this way. So, and when I did look at the schools and planning schools, I could see that that was never a huge teaching motive for future planners. So I used to say to my planners, we need to learn more, or we need to bring some people in that can help us learn that, so we can be able to better to respond to
Right.
these questions as they arise.
Right. Then I'll add one item from my side of this that is reflective of the fact that for my last 8 years, I got to serve as a city manager, and it wasn't something I'd planned for my career, that I would end my career as a city manager, but I enjoyed that work. It was, I tell you, it ages you in dog years, but on the other hand, it is fun and a tremendous challenge to do. But one of the other things that it taught me is that if I'm talking to a young planner coming up, I'm telling them, don't be preparing just to do the job you do well. Always think about the next step up. You're preparing for that next step. Nobody's going to promote you because you're doing your current job well. That's how you keep your current job. But if you learn the additional skills, the additional knowledge sets, I think this is a really time of opportunity for planners. When we were coming up, it was very rare to see a planner ever in a city manager role. There were very few of them.
Very few.
When I became an assistant city manager, I went to the state city manager conference. There were maybe, out of 500 attendees, there were maybe 25 who had a planning background. Today, it's a much larger number.
Yeah.
And part of that's because of a professional brain drain that's gone on, more openings, and because the desires of councils have changed. Cities used to incorporate because they needed a police or a fire department. Today they incorporate because they want control of land use decisions.
That's right.
So city managers...
That's why Sisters Heights incorporated.
Exactly.
Because they didn't want the county telling them what to do.
Exactly. So city managers that have that skill set, as long as you learn the other things you need to know, are going to be a leg up when it comes time to promote. So it has been a pleasure.
As usual. Great.
Our discussion will keep going over dinner tonight and probably a couple of drinks too, but thank you, and thanks
Thank you,
to Penn. Thanks to Penn
very
for
much
staging
giving us
these.
this opportunity to do this.